Do we know who is in control of the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, absolutely. The Iranian government and its armed forces.
And what is the status of the American blockade, about which the Secretary of Defense boasted under oath yesterday that it is now I don't know if this is conceivable, and I know you're not a Navy guy, but you certainly have great insight, a worldwide blockade.
Yes, I heard this too. The decision apparently is to globalize the blockade on Iran, which means, I guess, that you sail to places like the Strait of Malacca and stop vessels going to or from Iran. I have no idea. Perhaps the same thing is true for the Red Sea, although I think the Houthis will probably see to that in any case. And then I guess you're going to stop vessels going around the Horn in South Africa. I don't know. I don't know how many vessels we have that we can commit to this. Are we going to bring the entire Coast Guard out to sea? Because that's really the sort of thing the Coast Guard does. And then combine that with whatever the Navy can keep at sea. I don't know. It strikes me as both difficult, probably not attainable, not to the degree that he would probably like. And then the other possibility is that we end up in a confrontation with other powers who want access to the resources in the Gulf. And right now we're seen as closing that Gulf, not necessarily Iran, because the Japanese, the Chinese, the Koreans have all sat down with and worked out plans to bring their tankers in and out. The Iranians have accommodated them. They've accommodated the Indians. We seem to be the ones that are the sticking point for the Gulf blockade.
If the United States engages in a worldwide blockade, I'm using air quotes, of Iranian ships, I mean, by what authority? Isn't that an act of piracy?
Well, I guess it depends upon your perspective. Obviously, a lot of people could see things that way. We probably feel that we have a right, but perhaps more important, I think the view in Washington is that somehow or another we're doing the world a favor. That's not really true. 70% of our farmers say they can't afford to buy fertilizer and cultivate their fields. If you stop and consider that for a minute, the global South, which is almost entirely dependent upon the fertilizer that comes out of the Gulf, is in at least as bad, if not worse shape. So this means for the global South, the certainty of famines over the next several months. We're going to have shortages on the shelves of our stores that sell food. That's not the only thing. What I'm trying to get across is that, diesel, gasoline, jet fuel, fertilizer, all of these products, food, feedstocks, fuel, all of that is at risk right now. The world is facing a serious calamity. We're suffering here at home. It's going to get a lot worse. We've already had a 42% spike over the last 9 weeks in fuel, in oil, gasoline. It's only going to get worse from here. So I don't see how this particular attempt to harm Iran is going to do us any good. I think it's going to make more enemies for the United States, and I don't think we can enforce it. It's beyond our ability.
Is the decision to enforce this is it wise, or is it even realistic given the Chinese?
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head. There are a lot of foolish people in Washington who, in an effort to justify the campaign that was really begun at the insistence of Israel, its lobbying agents in the United States, that this is somehow or another going to harm China, and therefore that's good for us. Reminds me of stupid people in the Senate who stood up and talked about the numbers of Russians killed was somehow or another in our interest. It was never the case. This is not in our interest to harm China. In fact, this stands an excellent chance of leading to a confrontation with China that we should be interested in avoiding. So no, I do worry a great deal about that. At some point, we don't know where China's red lines are. We have difficulty figuring our own out, but we don't know quite what will precipitate or trigger a confrontation with the Chinese. They're nothing if not patient, and they don't want a war under any circumstances with us, neither do the Russians. But if we press this thing far enough, I think people could conclude they don't have any choice now but to deal with us militarily, since we are turning out to be, from their vantage point, a rogue nation.
Colonel, reports have come out of Washington in the past 24 hours that American Zionists, led by Mrs. Adelson herself, are aggressively lobbying President Trump to order what the Trump people have characterized as a short but powerful wave of strikes on Iran. Since a long but powerful wave of strikes on Iran did not have the desired result, what do they think they would accomplish with a short and powerful wave?
Well, these are no doubt some of the same people that told us that after 3 or 4 days, Iran would throw in the towel.
Right.
So I think we have to take that into consideration. I also think we have to look at Donald Trump's position right now. He's got a choice of maybe 2, perhaps 3 options. Option 1 is that he stands up in front of the American people and says, I've decided to suspend all military operations. This has produced a global crisis for millions and millions of people all over the world who are desperately dependent upon the resources of the Gulf. And I am not going to punish them because of our disputes with Iran. So I'm ending the conflict. I'm disengaging, and we'll look for mediaries to help us sort out our differences with Iran. Problem is, obviously, the Israel lobby doesn't like that. And as far as I can tell, they're still in charge. And that means Mr. Netanyahu is ultimately calling the shots. Secondly, we can just rely on this blockade. But as I think we've discussed before, how many ships have we got? How long can we do it? How problematic is it? It doesn't make sense. It's not a long-term proposition. And it could easily live to a wider and more dangerous confrontation with other powers like China. Not only China, by the way. And then the final one is to do what Mrs. Adelson is urging, on the assumption you can get it right this time. And I think President Trump is being briefed as we speak right now by Admiral Cooper on all of the assets available that could be hurled at Iran, including, I'm told, the U.S. Army's new hypersonic missile, which theoretically reaches beyond 1,000 miles and is obviously, if it's Mach 5 or higher, is impossible to stop. It's clearly hypersonic. And that somehow or another could turn this war around and lead to Iranian collapse. I don't think so. I think the Iranians are prepared to accept as much damage as we want to inflict. And they also, I think, probably have some new capabilities up their sleeves. And they will employ everything they have and do what they've promised, which is to utterly eradicate all the remaining oil infrastructure in the Gulf, which would be disastrous for the rest of the world because that means 10 years to recover from this. We forget that Iraq took 20 years to recover from the damage done to its oil fields. So that would be bad for the whole world. And I think the Iranians will also find ways to reach our ships at sea and any other bases that we have and do enormous damage to us there as well. But, if you exclude up front any alternative to what you want to have in terms of victory, as Donald Trump has done, what do you do, Judge? You pick up the old hammer again and hammer away.
2 days ago, the Iranian foreign minister traveled to St. Petersburg, Russia, where he was ostentatiously received by President Putin, who spent 90 minutes with him, and Foreign Minister Lavrov and other Russians and other Iranians. The following day, a phone call took place between President Putin and President Trump. I don't know who initiated the call. I don't know how those things happen. What do you think President Putin said to President Trump? And is there a causal relationship between Foreign Minister Araghchi's visit and the call between Presidents Trump and Putin?
Well, I listened earlier to a live discussion involving President Putin with some members of the press. And he described the fact that he had expressed his willingness to guarantee the security of Israel along with Iran to take control of whatever enriched uranium was there. He went through a series of measures, all of which were designed to essentially de-escalate the tension and bring people back to the table. He did not convey the impression that his recommendations were either rejected or well received. But I think Russia sees this as perhaps the last chance to avoid the larger calamity that we're discussing. I also think there's something else, and I don't know why this does not come up for discussion more frequently. I'm sorry about that. I think the larger issue is that you have finally something which everyone who has studied grand strategy has warned against. That is, we see Eurasia. And I'm not just talking about China and Russia. I'm also talking about many other countries that are on this Eurasian landmass who are concluding that China is a better safe hold, if you will, for their cash, their wealth. They're beginning to see BRICS as a very preferable alternative to their participation in what they see as a market dominated by us. They see a different financial system emerging that China has developed in concert with Russia as more secure, more reliable, more dependable. All of these things are bad because you're also seeing behind the scene new security arrangements that result in the coalition of military powers that could be directed against us. I think at this point, anyone who has any strategic insight has got to tell the president, stop, don't go any further, or we will be in territory from which we can never easily retreat, and from territory we may not survive.
But the president is probably going to listen to Mrs. Adelson and her colleagues, just as he listened to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his colleagues, notably David Barnea, the head of Mossad, when they sold President Trump, I'll use the vernacular, a bill of goods. They talked him into believing the Iranian government would be overthrown by the spontaneous eruption of the people in the streets after 96 hours of bombing.
Yeah. Well, that was always nonsense, but it was cleverly presented and well received by the audience, that is Donald Trump. You know, we have a big problem of seeing the rest of the world through our own lens. You know, we tend to impute to other populations a way of thinking that we're accustomed to, but doesn't really apply to them. I think probably the most glaring experience strategically of this sort of thing that had a terrible impact on the world was really the British decision in 1914 to go to war with Germany. The British cabinet initially wanted nothing to do with it, but ultimately Winston Churchill and a couple of others, sort of unrelenting warmongers, said, don't worry about this. Germany will be defeated in an afternoon. The Royal Navy's fleet in the North Atlantic will challenge the Germans in the North Sea. The Germans will be defeated, and that will end the war. Well, who in their right mind would have ever thought of such a thing? But they went ahead and declared war. After they'd done so, they brought in Herbert Kitchener, who was in Egypt, and they made him the new Minister of War or Secretary of State. And he said, what do you think now that you've declared war? Or now that we've declared war? And Kitchener said, well, you're going to have to raise armies of millions of men. The war will last at least 3 years, and it will be won or lost on the continent. Everyone was dumbfounded. It was the exact opposite of what Winston Churchill had said. And then when he walked out, all the reporters came rushing up to him and said, Mr. Minister, don't you think that this is a very brave decision on part of the British cabinet? He said, oh, yes, they're the bravest people in the world. They've just declared war on the largest, most powerful army in the world, and they have almost no army of their own. Well, I think that we're in a very similar position. We decided that the Iranians are going to sit there and take it. They can't really respond. They have no alternative, and they can be pounded into the dirt. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work.
Your recitation of history about Great Britain and Germany just provoked the following thought in my mind. Germany currently, under Chancellor Merz, who was blasted by President Trump this morning for something I didn't even pay attention why, is engaged in pretty serious remilitarization, is it not?
I think,
And if so, do you have any ideas about what that is all about?
well, I think it's overblown. Again, these are globalist leaders that dominate Western Europe, and they're desperate to sustain hostility with Russia and anybody else as a way of remaining in power. I think Merz's approval ratings are somewhere in the neighborhood of President Trump's. Same thing is true for Macron and Starmer. These people aren't going to last. Now, when it comes to pouring money into military power, this is a huge problem right now. Because if you watched what happened in eastern Ukraine and you watch what's happened right now in the Persian Gulf, you come to the conclusion that you're in a world that's so radically different from the one we've known for 80 years that the forces you have are not the forces you need. So if you're going to build military power right now, you probably need a good 5 to 10 years to sort out exactly what that looks like, to figure out exactly where your investments should go. So I think it's overblown. I think the German population is smarter and more reasonable than that. And before they release these funds for the construction of what looks like another World War II force, they're going to demand some answers. So I don't think it's a dangerous development. I think it'll go away. And instead, what you'll get is something else far more reasonable. I think the Russians know that, although it's not in their interest to downplay it. But nevertheless, what the Russians have done, what the Iranians have done, these things are so different from what we're experiencing on any level that to say you're going to have the greatest army in the world in 10 years without understanding what that should look like is stupid.
How dangerous is a Defense Department budget of $1.7 trillion a year?
Oh, it's ridiculous because all of that is going into the same old force. And of course, the people on the Hill will make cute remarks and snide remarks about it. But ultimately, their principal concern is to send the money where it's always gone. It's all about money flows inside the Beltway. And if you ask somebody in the Senate and the House, what's your job? They'll all tell you the same thing. I'm here to spend money. Imagine telling that to Americans 100 or 200 years ago. They'd have looked at you like you're crazy. But 250 years on, that's what they think their job is. So if you go to the Hill and you say, well, we're not going to build any more of these ships in this particular class, that's a waste of money. By the way, we're not going to build any more manned aircraft in this category. They're going to say, wait a minute, you can't do that. There are assembly lines in my district that depend upon those things. And of course, the defense industries will be on everybody's doorstep saying this is going to break us. We can't adapt. We can't do this. But that's what's necessary, and that's where we're headed. They're never going to be able to spend the trillions of dollars that they want. We're on the verge of a serious, giant financial crisis. Cheap oil and cheap credit are the keys to prosperity in the United States and throughout most of the world. We're losing cheap energy. We're not going to get it back for a while. And on top of that, cheap credit goes away with expensive energy.
Right.
If you can't get any credit, how do you build? How do you expand? It's not going to work. And you could listen to Ray Dalio. He's well known. And then you could listen to other lesser known analysts like Luke Groman. There are so many good people out there that are worrying about this.
Well, Dalio is terrific, agrees with you on everything you've been saying. I mean, the more the government borrows, the more it costs to borrow. And the more the government has to borrow money in order to pay the interest on borrowed money, which, of course, is a recipe for disaster. I want to go back to what was leaking out of D.C. last night, and you and I texted about it. Not only the Mrs. Adelson lobbying, and not only the Trump-Putin phone call, but apparently a Putin-Netanyahu phone call. Now, does President Putin have leverage with Prime Minister Netanyahu? What would he have said to Netanyahu? And is Netanyahu, as usual, don't bother me, or do they get along?
I don't think that Netanyahu told him, I've got other things to think about. I'm sure he listened. And President Putin has tried very hard to cooperate with and accommodate Israel. He's tried to do it without at the same time harming his relations with the numerous Islamic states and powers that have good relations with Russia. And I think President Putin said, look, if we come to an agreement with Iran, we become co-signatories. In other words, I'll sign, President Xi will sign, other great powers will sign, and we'll do everything we can to ensure your security. I think that's probably what he said. Now, what are the details of those agreements? I have no idea. The problem for President Putin is that Mr. Netanyahu, the prime minister, has something now that he's never had before and probably will never get again. And that is complete control of the United States Armed Forces and the absolute allegiance and obedience of the President of the United States and the Congress to whatever he wants. He's got to use that. It's a use it or lose it proposition for Israel. Either they get us back in, use everything that we've got left, or they might as well throw in the towel because they're beginning to understand at home they can't realize the Greater Israel Project. They cannot go on as they have, treating all of their neighbors and inhabitants of the region as animals, as subhumans. It's not going to work. So you either win it now with American military power or you're finished. And I think that's what's in the back of Mr. Netanyahu's mind.
Here's a tape made by a fascinating young man shortly before he was killed with a very articulate statement about the dangers of bombing the nuclear capabilities of Iran.
To be very honest with you, something that I'm against. I don't think we should bomb Iranian nuclear facilities. I just don't. I think it would be a huge mistake. It's an act of war against a major country. You go to war with Persia, it will bring your country down. The American people did not rise up in major numbers because we want war with Iran. That was never part of the deal. Okay. It was never like, hey, America first, we're going to go do a bunch of, targeted strikes on the inland of Iran. So that's just where I would say that would be a catastrophic mistake. Why we believe this? We have so many pressing problems at home and our leaders are internationally obsessed and they are domestically ignorant.
Internationally obsessed and domestically ignorant. I think a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump agree with what Charlie Kirk just said.
No, Charlie recognized the truth that today, and for this foreseeable future, frankly, there's nothing more important overseas than what happens inside our country. He knew that. And that's the whole problem with Israel First, which is where we are right now. We're the Israel First administration, and we're determined to make Israel First a reality on a global basis. That can't be done. It's going to lead to disaster for us, and I think ultimately Israel. So no, I think Charlie was absolutely right, and it's tragic that he paid the ultimate price, I guess, for his viewpoints. I don't know how else to explain this strange assassination, but then again, none of us really knows how anybody was killed of any significance over the last several years.
Right. Our colleague Larry Johnson is prepared to testify for the defense of the young boy accused, saying it was impossible for him to have killed Charlie. But another story for another time. Suppose Trump says thank you very much to Mrs. Adelson and her colleagues and enters into a peace agreement, not a treaty, not a ceasefire, a peace agreement with Iran. What will Israel do? What will Netanyahu do?
Well, there are Israelis that don't agree with Netanyahu, and there are prominent Jewish figures in the United States and Europe that don't agree with Mr. Netanyahu. And I think if they were to have their way, were they elected or appointed, I suppose they could try to transform Israel into a normal country in the sense that, Ambassador Freeman always discussed in the past, where you cooperate and live with your neighbors, making whatever required adaptations are in order to do that. But I think that's unlikely, frankly, for the reasons that I've already stated. So I don't think we're going to see that happen. So I'm afraid that if this all fails, then I suspect Israel, may fail. You may end up with a Palestinian state, and that will include Israel versus a two-state solution, which other people discuss. I think that's increasingly unlikely now.
Will the Gulf states leave the American empire? I mean, there's not much left there, is there?
They already have. And, this so-called imperial state system that we've created, where we have all these states on the periphery of Eurasia, Japan, Korea, you could argue to some extent Thailand, and certainly the Gulf states in the Persian Gulf region, Spain, Germany, Italy. All of this is going to go away. And this is not because we failed miserably to protect the Gulf states. That was going to happen for reasons of technology over which we didn't have much control and which we did not appreciate. You can't put large U.S. forces forward anymore. If you emphasize this forward presence, which is being one of the principal sources of enormous spending on defense since the end of the Second World War, they will be destroyed in the first minutes, certainly hours of any future conflict, as Iran has demonstrated. It's impossible to protect yourself from that. You can try, but you're never going to build enough missiles to counter all of the munitions and missiles and unmanned systems that are going to be thrown at you. So if you put them far beyond your borders, as we have, you're probably going to lose them. And that means that you've got to change the way you think about future conflict and how you will employ the forces that you've got. It means change in the way you look at warfare. I hope that people will realize that the strategic defense is now becoming far more effective, far more durable than the strategic offense. And we will have to abandon this forward presence operation, which is essentially a feature of forward offense or an offensive force posture that we can no longer subsidize. We've got to change the way we look at our own defensive needs.
Colonel, does President Trump recognize any restraints?
Well, I don't think so at this point, and why should he? I mean, frankly, he didn't feel the compulsion to go to the American people and build support for his policy. I don't remember him on a speaking tour all around the country trying to advocate that we should support war with Iran on behalf of Israel. Do you? I don't remember him saying anything about it.
No, he didn't do anything. He didn't go to the UN. He didn't go to the Congress. He didn't go to the American people.
Exactly. So obviously the Congress, you don't really have to worry too much about that, since the Israel lobby and its agents in the United States have effectively purchased the Senate and the House. So they have enough votes there to do pretty much what they want. You mentioned the United Nations. I think everyone sort of treats the United Nations with contempt. No, admittedly, I think the United Nations could be more than it is, but it's only as good as the people that are members of it. And as far as international law and norms of behavior and all these things that we hear from the globalists are concerned. So right now, he's on his own. I don't think he realizes that. And that's why the three choices that we discussed at the beginning are so important for him to make. He's got to sort through this. He could really step forward now. And I know this is humiliating for him. He finds this incomprehensible. But he's got to keep something in mind. If he doesn't step forward and say, we understand the trend lines, we know where this is headed, this is going to harm hundreds of millions of people all over the world. We don't want to do that. So I am directing a suspension of operations against Iran, number one. Number two, I'm disengaging our forces, and I'm turning to others in the international community as mediators to help us resolve our differences with Iran. Now, to do that, he's got to reject Adelson. He's got to reject the Israelis and tell them enough's enough. We've gone as far as we can. We're going no further. Now, why won't he do that? If he doesn't do it, there may be a number of reasons that we have no idea. Maybe his life is being threatened. Maybe he's being blackmailed. Maybe he personally just refuses to accept the possibility that he made some bad calls. Everybody does, even presidents from time to time. But that's something that he may be unable to accept. But if he refuses to do this, Judge, neither a perpetual blockade nor a massive assault on Iran is going to help us. It's not going to win the so-called war with Iran. It's not going to position Israel for dominance in the region. It's going to destroy our position in the Middle East strategically forever. And the rest of the world is going to look upon us as the principal menace, a malevolent power that has to be watched and guarded against. We'll see lots of Iranian-like military systems begin to emerge all over the world with the purpose of keeping us out.
Colonel, at your intellectually honest, personally courageous, absolutely articulate best. Particularly that last answer. I wish the president and his people were watching, not for me, not for you, but they should be listening to you, but for peace in the world, for sanity in foreign policy. But thank you, Colonel. I can't thank you enough. Great, terrific conversation, my dear friend.
Okay, Judge. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You as well. We'll see you again soon. All the best.